Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CLT Symposium. This is our second session. And today we have with us Janae Cohn, and I'm going to give her a very informal introduction, and then she can introduce herself more formally. So I've known, those of you who know me well know that I'm on Twitter all the time, and I met Janae through Twitter. We had a lot of very similar perspectives during the pandemic. I think we had a lot of, similar values and pedagogical styles and all of that. But I think there are two things that stood out to me that made me think, okay, Huda, we want to invite Janae to be our keynote. First of all, I was giving a keynote at a big conference last summer, the DTLT conference, and it was one of the last days of the conference. And I told people at the very beginning of mine, what was one of the most useful things that you'd attended in the conference? And so many of them said Janae's workshop, which was, I think, a day before mine or something. So that already let me know that I had missed something. I hadn't been there, and I missed something really engaging and really interesting. And then when we were getting ready for our symposium, I asked some people on Twitter, tell me someone who, who's really good at humanizing learning and so on, who does really engaging and interactive keynotes. And Janae was someone that several people mentioned. And I'm like, oh, I know Janae. Of course I know Janae. I know Janae's great. And so thankfully, when we asked her, she was available and she agreed to come. And she works in a similar to Center for Learning and Teaching like us here at CLT. And she does a lot of open scholarship work as well. And I will let her start. And I'm going to say again that the reason we chose this particular session, there's a lot that's good about this session, but the low stress, I think, is the most important thing we all need right now. And so I'm telling Janae, I hope this session is nourishing for all of us, and that we can all relax and listen to her, even though it's 6 p.m. Sometimes 6 p.m. is a good time to unwind as well. So thank you all for joining us today. And go ahead, Janae.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Maha. What a warm, generous introduction. So grateful to be connected with you and to now be connected with all of you in this community. It is really a gift to share space with all of you today, and a gift that we can do this online from all different places, right? Your different homes, wherever you are. So really, it's the honor and pleasure is mine here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to orient to a few things for this conversation today, and then we'll dive right in. So I'll take a moment here to share, and we'll go ahead and make this full screen. Okay, here we go. So I will invite you at this juncture, right, to actually, if you would like to access these slides beyond what I'm sharing on the screen today, if you have a second screen you're using, or if you want to have these slides up on the same screen that you're with right now, I call this kind of your goodie bag. This is sort of your party favor that you can keep with you, both here and beyond our conversation today. So as Maha mentioned, my name is Janae Cohn. I use she, her pronouns. I work as the Director of Academic Technology at California State University, Sacramento, which is a large, we call it a regional comprehensive public institution here in the US. So it's really, we serve a lot of local students, most of whom are first gen college students, most of whom English is not their second language, or excuse me, for English is not their first language. So we have a lot of diverse student needs that we're thinking about as we navigate our, what I like to call our next phase in thinking through how we blend different modes of instruction. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on designing experiences for you and your students that are low tech, low stress, and high impact. We're going to conceive of strategies that will help us bridge those on-campus experiences that I know are really vital to many of you for creating a well-functioning university culture. But for also thinking about how those online experiences, the experiences that go outside of the classroom space, how those can really continue to create fluid, smooth community for our students that help them see the meaning of what they do in your on-campus classrooms, wherever they are. I am calling you from Sacramento, California, and in the US, the impacts of colonialism remain with us, have been with us since our founding. So I think it's important in terms of my own advocacy as a white US citizen to just take one moment to kind of acknowledge Indigenous culture and the impacts of colonialism that exist today, Just to say that here in Sacramento, we acknowledge we're on the traditional territory and current homelands of the Maidu, Miwok, and Nisenan people. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work on their land, and we thank these nations. We keep them in our hearts and thoughts as we're in this space today. And speaking of honoring and taking care of ourselves, one other bookkeeping thing I like to say here before we really dive into the content is that I know you're had a long day today, right? It is after 6:00 p.m. You have just made a tremendous leap to come on and do more learning after hours. So I'm grateful for you for taking this time, for sharing space with us. So whatever you need to do to take care of yourself today, do it, right? Your camera doesn't need to be on. It can be if you'd like it to be, but you can switch it on and off as you so choose. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. We're going to do a lot of active engagement in the chat primarily. There may be some opportunities for you to raise your hand and speak if you'd like to do that as well, but you have choices here. Please do what's comfortable for you. If you need to eat or drink, I know it's probably supper time for a lot of folks, so stay hydrated, stay fed, whatever you need to feel comfortable in your own body today. If you want to take a walk while you're listening to this or step away for a minute, all of these invitations are open to you. We're here for about an hour together. I know that's a long stretch of time, so I just want you to feel comfortable and ready to engage in whatever way makes sense for you. Finally, as I alluded to, we're going to be pretty interactive today. We're going to engage in what I call several chat break activities throughout this conversation. So these will happen at about every 15 minutes or so, actually. So there'll be a lot of opportunities for you to check in. And I'm seeing someone already in the chat. Thank you. Maha's putting a note in the chat about my Twitter handle. So if it energizes you to engage in these chat breaks, to hop in there, I'm going to invite you to do that. It's going to be a springboard for a lot of our conversation today. But if you prefer just to listen, that's where you are today. Totally understand. Again, bring whatever you need to make this time useful for you today. And if you're a tweeter, as Maha and I are, do feel free to tweet if that engages you. Maha put my handle in the chat. It's also up here on the screen. If there's a conference hashtag, please feel free to use that as well if you'd like to sort in that way. These are all just options for you to think about for your engagement today. All right, so without further ado, here's today's plan. So we're really going to divide up this time today into our segments of thinking about low tech, low stress, and high impact. We'll unpack what it means to have a low tech experience when teaching dual delivery, which may seem a little ironic at first, given that dual delivery instruction inherently hinges upon having tech to connect those who are in the classroom and those who may be remote. However, I do think there's some ways we can think expansively about tech. So it's not just about the cameras, the microphones, the whiteboards, right? I want us to think a little bit bigger about the ways that we imagine the work that technology does to make it feel a little bit less like it's about how much are the tools working and more about what are the tools doing for us? What do those tools advance for our own pedagogies? Then we'll move to that segment that I know Maha is very interested in, that I saw lots of you nod along when he said, yes, low stress, that's what we need right now. We're going to talk about some strategies for how we reduce stress when it comes to incorporating technology with teaching. We're going to touch on some complexities around that, right? What are the things that can be stressors? Is it just the functional stuff cannot work? Or to what extent does our stress come from some of the behavioral kinds of concerns, the ways in which we talk about the norms that we practice when we're using technologies or connecting across multiple distances? And finally, we'll end on what's high impact, right? What are some small things we can do in dual delivery instruction that can make a big impact? So this is where we're going to be concrete throughout, but at this end point, we're going to get to some really specific strategies of things that don't take a lot of tech, that aren't about the cameras, that aren't about the microphones, but are really about engaging students and trying to find multiple ways to reach them where they are. And we should have a little time at the end for just some open conversation, other questions, comments, ideas. I know lots of you here have been practicing dual delivery instruction for some time now, at least several months. I know that in prior symposia, you've heard from Brian Beatty and other sort of leading folks on dual delivery instruction. So I bet you have lots of thoughts, and we'll make sure we get to hear from you and bring it all together at the end. All right, any questions about what we're doing before we dive in? I'll take a pause just for a moment and see if there's anything in the chat that has come up. Any questions about how to engage or how to start today? And thank you, Ibrahim. I'm glad you think the slides are well designed. This is modified from a template from SlidesGo, in case you're wondering. So I can't take all the credit. That's the website where I use a lot of slides from and modify. Okay, well, let's go ahead and dive in then today. One more acknowledgement I want to make. What I have up on the screen here is an image of the COVID-19 memorial that's in Washington, D.C. At the White House. Heard President Biden constructed this memorial to acknowledge the tremendous amount of loss that so many of us have experienced in the last 2 years. And I know globally, we've experienced a tremendous amount of loss. There's been a tremendous amount of grief in the last couple of years. And I think it's worth saying that the grief we experience, it's not linear. Recovery doesn't happen from one end to the other. It's circular sometimes it's a wavy line. Sometimes it looks like peaks and valleys. But the point is, if you have felt grief, if you have felt loss, you are not alone. And it might hit you at different points. It might hit your students at different points, because your students, everyone in the whole world has suffered an extremely traumatic event. And we're still trying to understand what the ramifications are, what the impacts are of that event. And I think if there's one thing that I've learned from the past couple of years when it comes to my own teaching, my own learning, is that there are so many things that we can't see about people's lives that impact even the smallest things that they bring to our class environment. I've been thinking a lot about students' lived experiences in particular, and how those lived experiences shape what they do, what they bring to our spaces. On this slide, I have several I statements that I've heard from students, that my colleagues have heard from students over the past couple of years in particular, because I think more of these lived experiences have emerged as we've been adopting instructional modalities that literally bring us into our students' lived spaces, their homes. Sometimes students might disclose things about their life experiences voluntarily, but when it comes to, again, actually beaming into those homes and spaces, we learn things that we might not have seen otherwise, that open up vulnerable conversations that can really change how we might approach and shape these experiences. So I'll read what's up on the screen. These I statements I think are important to give voice to. So students will say things like, I need extended time on assignments. I can't sit for a long time. I work exclusively on my mobile phone. I have no private space. I work 25 hours a week. I use text-to-speech tools. I'm taking care of an ill family member. I am food insecure. I have hearing loss, so hearing is difficult. My family and I share a computer. I am chronically ill. I have a toddler and an infant. I live with depression. And again, these lived experiences might be things that students disclose. They might be things we see. These might be things that we hear. But often these lived experiences, they might not be visible to us. We might not know about them until much, much later, maybe after the course is over. And while we can't anticipate every single lived experience, every single piece of background, every single identity that our students bring into our classroom spaces, we can do what we can to anticipate, right? To appreciate this diversity of experiences and try to design for them in ways that help students feel included, no matter what they're bringing, whether we see it or whether we don't see it. But something, and yes, Imam, exactly. So are teachers. Teachers are also bringing that huge variety of lived experiences, of backgrounds, right? So the more that actually we can be willing to be vulnerable and share to the extent that we can, what we're bringing as well, what diversity of experiences we might be carrying with us, the more comfortable students may feel in their own way to also share those with us too. So I appreciate you saying that, Aman. Thank you. A concern that I heard spoken a lot over the past couple of years was this feeling that a lot of instructors have felt this really big gap between that lived experience, those embodied experiences that students are bringing, and that dual delivery course experience, right? I think if you've been teaching this modality, this may resonate for you, that there might be this feeling of disconnect between the students who are in the on-campus room and the students who are remote. They might feel like they're kind of the floating heads and you're in the embodied space. And that gap is a problem, right? Because it exacerbates those things that we do and don't see even more if we're not really intentional about bridging them. And I think that a lot of the response to our bridging of this lived experience and this dual delivery course modality, we've tended to want to focus on, okay, how do I make sure that everything's working? How do I make sure functionally we can hear and we can see? And that's all good and well, right? We do have to start with the functional pieces of it. However, I'm curious about kind of the variety of strategies we can use to close this gap. I'm curious about how we share space, how we build space that's equally as meaningful, equally as accessible to everyone, regardless of where they are, so that we can feel like we can bring, again, whatever we're comfortable sharing, but our whole selves to the spaces that we live and work and study in. So really, here's our goal, right? By creating low tech, low stress, high impact experiences in dual delivery, we're trying to create learning experiences where all students can access engaging discussions, opportunities for critical problem solving, and space for peer community building wherever they are. And I've bolded and put wherever they are into a different color here to really emphasize that wherever they are means not just where their bodies are, right? Not just which room they're in, but where their mindsets are, right? Where their experiences are. I want us to think really expansively about that. And we're going to work through a few different case studies, and we're even going to do a few activities where we're going to think about how we invite that sharing of where students are beyond just, again, the literal location of where their bodies are, which I know is a real focus in dual delivery in particular. So let's go ahead and start by talking about the low tech piece of it. We have to start with the functional piece, right? How do we create access points? How do we make sure that those there aren't any barriers to entry? And how do we do that in a way that's not going to require perhaps a group of AV specialists to make that possible? So here's our first chat break. Since I've been talking for about 15 minutes here, it's time for us to take a little break. I am curious, if you wouldn't mind, if you're interested in sharing, to put in the chat, when you hear the word low tech, what do you think of when you think of something that's low tech? What does that evoke for you? Interpret this as you will. It could be maybe you think of a particular technology, maybe you think of a particular experience, but what comes out for you? And as you think about this, I'm going to read out loud what's coming in the chat. So if you don't have the chat open or you can't see it, I'm going to narrate it a bit so you can still hear what's happening there. So Paul says sticky notes. I do love a good sticky note. Ola says simple technology. Ola, I'd be interested in knowing what simple means to you or what simple means to other folks, right? What does simple mean? Alexander thinks something on paper. Okay, sticky notes, paper. These are both examples of kind of low tech things. Maha saying minimalist, just enough for what I need. Easy to learn, the clear function. Great, so I appreciate that Maha's kind of breaking down the qualities of simplicity. Clear, functional. Paul says whiteboards. Sama says no coding level. Zainab says they don't need to be technically savvy when you think of low tech. Okay, yeah, I'm curious about that too, right? What does it mean when we say technically savvy? What technology are we referring to? Dalal says easily used. Nabil, not complicated. Aman, the podium and screen. Hiba, a book. So we got that paper again. Several of you are thinking about paper. Sama also says low bandwidth. Okay, so that's kind of what we mean by low tech and simple. That's interesting, right? Like that low cognitive load actually is something I'm maybe reading between the lines here. So it doesn't require a lot of extra thinking. Simplicity, says Kim. Afaf does not need advanced technology. Hanan, old methods like face-to-face conversations, whiteboards. Azah, maybe just one tool, not complicated. Ola says safe again. Oh, I'm really interested in what we mean by safe. That's such an interesting word and such a powerful word, actually, right? Because safety is so important to learning. We have to feel comfortable and safe to take on the challenge of learning. And Maha, low internet bandwidth, right? So thinking about things that aren't, I mean, the streaming video, this is really high bandwidth that we're doing in some ways right now, but by turning your camera off, you lower that bandwidth a little bit. Hands up, says Paul. Okay, so your body is a kind of technology in the classroom too. That's interesting to think about as well. Kismat says flexibility. Ahmed, excuse me, says efficiency and accessibility. Aman comes in again, focus on the students, not the complexity of the equipment surrounding us and what will go wrong. Right. So I'm seeing a lot of themes here about eating chocolate. That is kind of low tech with our low tech bodies. I love that. And I do feel like sort of food and sharing food is something that we haven't been able to do a lot of in the pandemic. That's actually really important for building community, isn't it? Right? We think of food as something that really bridges a lot of different cultures. So I'm seeing three big themes here. And I want us to touch on these themes as we think of some activities and some planning ways that we can channel the spirit of low tech into dual delivery, which again, I recognize might feel like a hard thing to do because everything we've sort of said here in the chat might be challenges to do dual delivery. Sticky notes, like actual, I don't have a sticky note by me. Oh wait, I do. Sticky notes, right? I can show you these through the screen, right, virtually, but you can't touch them, you can't move them around, right? So this isn't an equally accessible technology for us, and we're distributed across multiple spaces. Paper too, right? It has certain evocations. We have certain reactions to paper that might feel quite simple, quite easy, quite clear in its functionality, but it's not equally accessible. Whiteboards too might not be equally as visible or as accessible in these dual delivery or partially distanced kind of formats, right? So it's valuable to recognize that these are things that we think of because they are a part of the full learning environment. These are the materials that create these landscapes. Again, however, they might not be accessible. So what do we do? How do we channel the spirit of the other theme I'm saying, right? Not complicated, easy, low bandwidth, simple, low cognitive load, efficient and flexible. How do we bring those qualities and still make those qualities legible for students who may be in multiple kinds of spaces? I have a couple thoughts. I'm going to start with something a little abstract before we really answer that question, because we need to lay a little groundwork before we can answer that question. There's an old design Inazage, and it was coined by Don Norman, who is a sort of one of the sort of founders of the field of user experience design. And this design adage says that well-designed technologies should be invisible, right? So if we think about the design of a door, in this image I have on the screen here, there's a handle that's sort of vertically oriented. And you might think if you just walked up to this handle and encountered it, that you would grip the handle and pull it to enter into this space. But you can see in this image that there are words, the word push on the side of the door, which suggests that even though it might look like you have to pull the door to open it, you actually need to push it. You have to use both hands to push the door open to enter into the store space. So someone like Don Norman would say, this is a poorly designed door. If you have to have written instructions to tell someone how to enter the room, then this requires too much thinking, right? There's too much cognitive load. This isn't simple enough. You shouldn't need to have a written explanation. You should just know how to be able to open the door. And I get that. And I think that many of us are thinking of this as we think of low tech, that we think of things that we don't even have to think about. We could just do it. However, I want to argue that for lots of people, they might have to think about using technologies in ways that you do not have to anticipate because your body and your needs may be different. So in the case of this door, this is actually a bit of an ableist sort of metaphor because it suggests that everyone has hands, everyone has feet to open doors in this way. And that's just not true. That there may be no such thing as intuitively opening a door for everyone in quite the same way. The written instructions might take a little extra work, but they also level the playing field. They help us eliminate or avoid assumptions. And we can't see it in this image, but I would hope that there was also a button that would help you push the door open and automatically swing it that someone would also have to locate. So the point is, I'm not saying we should be creating tons of barriers to getting into spaces, to opening doors. And when we think about our classrooms too, we don't want to create additional barriers to entry or access. However, we also can't make assumptions that all the technology we're thinking of is easily accessible. I'm thinking of things, I love books. My desk is covered in books. If you could see where I'm working right now, you'd see the pile of paperback books that I have. But I recognize that paperback books are not even low tech for everyone, right? Some people might need modified, larger print Some people might need these books read out loud to them because images, visuals are not accessible to them. So the point is, I don't think good design is invisible, right? And especially when it comes to teaching in dual delivery modalities where we have the internet at our disposal. The internet is just not one door, right? The internet is multiple doors, and we may need to help our students, we may need to help ourselves be more cognizant of where all the doors are, which doors you have to open, which choices you have to open that door. It might not just be one handle. It might not just be one button. Again, that might make it seem like it's more complicated when you have all those choices available, but we're going to think through some strategies to make that possible. I'm seeing the chat kind of blow up on me a little bit here. So I'm just wanting to take a quick pause to see kind of how we're engaging, right? So yes, Maha speaking to Braille for written instructions, right? It's another way in which that technology, the book, might not be accessible for everyone. Yeah, Nabil, I'm not familiar with the concept of system one, system two thinking, but I'm hoping, I'm seeing Kahneman's thinking fast and slow mentioned here from Hoda as well. So I'll have to get more familiar with that reference, that these how fast and slow thinking shape perception and choice. So I appreciate you bringing in a reference. I've heard of Daniel Kahneman's work, but I haven't read about that particular framework for it. So that's going to be some good intertextual reference for me to check out later, and maybe bring in next time that I do this talk. I always appreciate when people bring in references and experiences to tie these thoughts together. So the question remains, right? How do we make these options visible? How do we create accessibility in ways that don't feel like they're extra cognitive burden or don't feel like they're extra cognitive load for us and for our students? Well, I'd say that one thing we need to do is we just need to kind of make the affordances and constraints of our technology visible, right? When it comes to teaching in particular, just showing students where the door is, right? Where is the handle that you push? Where is the button that you push? Where is the handle that you pull? Just pointing out where those things are can make a tremendous world of difference. And again, that doesn't mean, to your point in the chat, becoming AV experts, having to know how every wire or cable works. But it's showing, here are the wires, here are the cables, here are the buttons, and here are ways that we can bring in those experts to help you and me do that effectively. Another framework I think is useful to keep in mind here, because something I often hear when I give this talk is, okay, Janae, sounds good. I'd like to make all these things visible, but I don't know all this myself. I don't even know how all the technology works. And when I think of low tech, I don't really think of knowing all the inner workings. I think of it being really clear and really purposeful and really simple. How do I do it all? And that's when I like to sort of refer to, and yes, Hoda, it is exactly like explicit instruction in assignments. Yes, I really appreciate that connection. It's that same kind of transparency, making clear what's your pedagogical purpose and what's your technological purpose. Why are we doing it this way? Who does it reach? How am I helping to reach you? Exactly, so that's a really good connection, thank you. But the other thing I like to point out is that as faculty, you are not alone in doing this work. That part of that low tech thinking, right, is remembering that you don't actually have to be the expert in every single part of the space. And I like this framework from Badru Khan. This is a global e-learning framework from like almost 20 years ago, actually. So I know this image even looks a little dated. It's designed in its own way. But Khan pointed out that every successful blended learning experience, and in 2003, blended learning was a phrase that was used to describe kind of this bridging of online and on-campus spaces as well. Dual delivery was not so much a thing 20 years ago, but this concept of bringing technology into the classroom was very much a thing back then. And Khan argues that when we're designing a blended learning experience of any kind, we really have to think kind of in terms of multiple pillars, right? That our choices are informed by the pedagogy and the technology, yes, but also our institutional constraints, what's available to us, our resource support, who are we working with, who is available to us, I saw Maha and Hoda shared with me your Google site page on dual delivery instruction. I was really impressed by all the video tutorials and work from clearly a really well-established team of people who are here to help you think about the sort of blending of different constraints and resources to support the creation of your blended learning environment. But we also have to think about the intersection of the interfaces you're using, right? What are the limits there? What are the affordances? What's available? The ethical piece here is also hugely important, right? When you're engaging with different technologies, what risks are there? What ethical obligation do you have to your students? Do you have to yourself to engage with this technology in your classroom? How does evaluation fit in this conversation, right? When you're designing a blended learning experience, how are you evaluating the efficacy of that experience? How are your students being evaluated? So thinking of these factors in sort of this pillar model, it's kind of a hexagon of experiences, I hope should help us kind of map out and see what our options are and where we can get help and support to reduce that cognitive load, to reduce that burden. There's a heuristic that I've written that's coming out in a book chapter next year that I think might also help us simplify in a way all the options available to us. So someone else in the chat, when they thought of low tech, they thought of having a clear purpose, maybe just picking one thing. And I think it's easier to do that when you start to kind of map out a simple who, why, what, how, where, and when framework, right? So I like to start with who are your learners, right? Who are they? Who's entering this space? What can you anticipate or know about them? Why are these learners in their class? You know, so for dual delivery in particular, why are some beaming in remotely? Why are some there on campus? What brings them to that space? And why in your class in particular? And then what do learners need to do to be successful? What will it take for them to succeed in whatever way you see fit, whether it's, you know, passing the class, understanding the concepts, moving on to the next course in your sequence. Being transparent about that too will also help you center and get simpler, more purposeful about someone said just pick one tool, right? If you think about any connection between one tool and one question, it would be this what question, I think. What do I need to be successful? What one tool might make that possible? If you can make that connection to try and prioritize. How will learners understand their roles in your course? What do they think they need to bring? How will they simplify and lower their cognitive load to engaging? Where will learning experiences take place? And then when will learning experiences take place? In this heuristic, I deliberately put where and when at the end, because I think, again, it's easier, it's simpler, you get more purposeful, and you lower your bandwidth in terms of your own reasoning about the technology you use, if you can narrow first on what you're trying to accomplish and who the people are in your room. That will make it easier to eliminate the bells and whistles, right? You don't have to be thinking about all the various access points. If I could turn back time and get rid of one conversation from pandemic teaching, it would be all the hang up over what's happening synchronously, what's happening asynchronously. That's those where and when pieces. We of course need to know when experiences will be accessed by students, but I think it's more important for us again to simplify by just narrowing in on what are the main things you're trying to accomplish? What do students need to do in that space before getting too hung up on all the details of where and when those experiences happen? So this is a pretty broad framework here. So I want to get even a little bit more concrete. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because we're approaching our next 15-minute mark here. And I think we're almost ready for a chat break to start to bring some of these thoughts together a little bit more. But once you start to sort of map out that who your students are, why they're there, what they're doing, and then what institutional constraints you're working within, there are some tools that I think can create some pretty low-tech shared space that can be accessible in your shared space in a dual delivery class, which is really your online space. I like to say that most classes now, even when you're on campus, they're going to have an online backbone because that is the shared space. And we can get simple about that without it being involved with a ton of AV expertise. So collaborative documents are one really great tool that you could use to bridge those online on-campus experience. Things like Google Docs, Office 365 shared documents, any place where you and your students can write together. That can be a great place to discuss shared policies. We're going to do a little work on that in about 15 minutes or so. Any space where you can work together to bridge where you are across multiple spaces can be really very helpful for making visible where your ideas intersect, where they might come together. Similarly, just as we're doing today, right, we've got this chat going, and we are all over the world today. I'm much further away from from all of you, I'm the furthest out. But we're still able to hear and see and bridge our conversations in a space as simple as a chat room where we can all type and see what our thoughts are in writing. In a dual delivery class, you might have heard of the concept of a chat jockey. Kevin Kelly calls it that. I think I've heard others call them chat buddies. But the idea is that you might have someone on campus be really monitoring the chat, inviting folks online to contribute to the chat as well. And so that even if you don't have the microphones, even if you don't have the videos, someone in the on-campus space is advocating for the folks remotely. I think actually Maha has also spoken to this a little bit on Twitter in her dual delivery module for you all as well, right? Just finding someone who's willing to be a voice, an advocate for the folks who are in that online space, making visible, again, affordance, right? But affordance of this space and a constraint we have is that the text is our common denominator, our common space. So really elevating that, elevating what students need in that environment can be really powerful. I also like something I call a digital pin board, and in a way, it's kind of like paper, like those sticky notes that I think someone mentioned first, except for you don't have to touch the sticky notes necessarily to get quick one-off ideas that you can move around. You could do this in as simple of a space as a PowerPoint presentation, a Google Slide presentation that you share with your students. You create text boxes that are essentially like Post-it notes. Where if you have a brainstorming activity where you want everyone to contribute, again, that online space, that text space, that's your shared space. And so if you want students thinking a little less sequentially or linearly than in a document or in the chat, creating a kind of digital pin board might be a helpful space to do that. We can kind of check in on more of these sort of concrete tools and strategies as we go on a little bit more. But just some ideas, again, to make visible what the gaps are and how we connect with each other, while also finding some tools that give us that affordance, that benefit of working together across those different spaces. So again, I want to recognize, yes, Maha, exactly, that could be like Padlet or Jamboard or other really good examples. Yes, where you could also create kind of sticky notes, Post-its that kind of help bridge those spaces, absolutely. So I acknowledge that we're starting to think about a lot of complexity still. Even low tech, right, means that we want to be mindful, cognizant of different sets of needs without perhaps all the, again, the bells and whistles necessarily of the microphones and the cameras. But how do we reduce that stress for us? We thought a lot about how we reduce the stress for students, how we give them multiple access points, but for you as instructors, again, I recognize this is a lot for you to hold on to. So here's our chat break. I want to hear from you a little bit. When you're using new technology for your teaching for the first time, what helps you to feel confident? What lowers your cognitive load or your capacity to make these choices available? Even if you're using just documents or just chat, or you're relying a lot upon your library or your IT, or you're trying to make these choices transparent, what helps you feel confident in doing that? Practice, says Aliyah. Yes. Sama says trying it first. Hanan says when a peer explains how the technology works. Nice, so getting some support. Nabil trying it first with a friend. Good, so I'm seeing a lot about practice here. Having peer support. Interactions, says Hoda. Good. Hoda says seeing someone use it in modeling. Imam and I know the students are familiar with it. Interesting, so having a little bit of that prior knowledge, that ties into what we were just talking about actually, right? Getting to know your students first, anticipating their needs, and then building the tech from there, right? Not starting with the tech, starting with who they are and who you are. Having a backup plan, says Azza, yes, that's huge, right? Knowing you've got a plan B, not feeling so reliant on just one thing. Sufficient training, says Ahmed, right? That peer support. Kim says comfortability with the app. Kesmat, knowing you've ready support, yes. Hoda, succeeding, right? Building prior experiences where you are successful. Alexander, students and teachers struggling and learning together. Alexander, I love that idea, right? Of building, because a lot of you are speaking to community, right? You build confidence by being in community with other people. It could be your peers, it could be maybe your tech support team. But I appreciate the idea of building that community with your students too, and making your own kind of process of learning vulnerable to them as well. Again, even if it's not a bunch of cameras, or a bunch of microphones, you're still learning. We're all still learning. And Kim says yes to plan B, right? Having a little bit of a sense of, if one thing doesn't work, knowing you have options. Is all, I can never be too sure of the technology. Yeah, that's sometimes true. And practicing, right? Seeing what your options are, even when something does break down. You always have the technology, that low tech right of your bodies. You can always think about where you can bridge or help bring in an embodied experience. And seeing things kind of slow down here. Hoda, teaching others to use it helps you feel confident. Another nice way to bring in that social connection, right? You can build confidence by learning something from others, by teaching it, having it be this cyclical communal conversation. That's great. So again, a few really key themes here: practice and social community. And we're going to build off of those ideas with some of these low stress strategies. And when using technology, it does not distract me, Zainab says. Right, so that might kind of come from the practice, right? Getting that sense of the more you use it, the more familiar you are with the machinations. I want to say that I think sometimes when we say technology doesn't distract us, we try to render it invisible, right? If I don't see it, then it's simple. I don't have to think about it. I think we still need to be able to see it, right? We still have to know what impacts the technology is having on us and our students. But I think that the more we get comfortable with trying it, with seeing it for what it is, right, the less we're kind of hung up on that first level of kind of, I would say, cognitive load of just understanding how to get in, right, how to access. The more we know how to get in, how to get to that main point of entry, the easier it is to get to more complicated ways of thinking. So one thing that kind of will help, I think, with this sort of plan B thinking that a lot of you are already sort of speaking to in the chat as ways that help you feel confident, help you socialize. I have this graphic organizer. I've shared this in a number of different contexts, but I think it's particularly important for dual delivery. And what I usually encourage folks to do to kind of lower the stress, to think kind of expansively about what's available to them and not get too worried about one thing not working, is to sort of try and break down, in your dual delivery class, what is your learning activity type, right? What are you having students do? This goes back to the heuristic. What do students need to be successful? Okay, if you determine that they need to be able to think critically to be successful, let's just say, you might want to have them do a large group discussion or a small group activity, right? Then you can think about why. Why do they need to do this kind of activity to be successful? Maybe it promotes independent reflection before students share their ideas. And then they can start to back in from there with their plan on where, right? Where could this happen? Could this happen in the classroom at tables? Could this happen in a computer lab? Could this happen outside? Could this happen at home? Right? Try to envision, put yourself in those places to make visible those options, where these things can occur. And then we can start thinking about the tools that are needed. When we're talking about low tech, right, we were thinking a little bit about, okay, maybe just pick one or two things that you know. This is where you can kind of list those things out, right? What do they need to make this happen? What do I know how to use? Some of you mentioned this in your confidence as well, right? When it doesn't distract me, when I'm feeling ready to use it, try and just name those things that students can access. And then start to think about alternatives, right? Could this be done a little differently? Could it not be? Which things are absolutely necessary? And which things are really just choices or really just options? And then your questions, right? Are there still questions that you have about facilitating this type of activity? Who could you turn to? Again, our other theme here is about the social piece of it, right? Seeing someone else using it, interacting with others, getting advice from a peer. That's kind of where this questions column can come into place. You can check in and see where you might need to get that help. This might seem like a lot of things to think about again, but listing them out, just seeing it, can actually save time, can actually save stress, because it reduces the unknowns. It eliminates the surprises, that moment that can create a lot of stress when you go, wait, I didn't expect that to happen. I didn't think that would happen. That's what this exercise is sort of trying to invite you to anticipate for yourself, in addition to anticipating your students' needs. But I know we can't prepare for everything. So I want us to think on the other side of low stress here. We've talked a bit about technology, right? The ways that we can reduce those barriers to using it, the ways we can simplify and get more focused. But what we haven't yet talked about is, I think, the even more complicated piece, which is sort of socializing the uses of these technologies and how our students understand it. So I want to take another break and think about a scenario here. And I wanted to read the scenario together. I'm going to read it out loud. And in the chat, I want to hear what you would do in this situation, because part of reducing stress, again, is also anticipating some of what our students are understanding about the space too. So here's our situation. Mohammed has been attending your class on campus. After class one day, he comes up to you and complains that he can't get a hold of one of his peers that he's been assigned to work with on a group project. He blames the fact that his peer has been coming to class remotely. If Zeke was just here in person, I could try to meet with him after class. I don't know what to do. How would you help Mohammed? I want to pause and think about this, because you might have thought about your plan Bs. You might have thought about getting help and practicing and socializing, but your students might not get all that. They might not be prepared in all those ways. So how would you help your students understand some of these options? Maha, thank you for asking the clarifying question. I was thinking that people could answer in the chat, or if you'd prefer though to speak, I'm happy to, we have, I think, enough time here, that if you'd like to raise a hand and try to answer this verbally as well, you're welcome to do that. But why don't we pause? Let me just give you kind of a minute to think about the situation. And you can decide whether you'd like to raise a hand and speak out loud, or if you prefer to kind of answer in the chat. Yes, thank you, Maha. Yeah, we've got about a little less than 30 minutes left. So I'm seeing a few responses come in already that I'll amplify here. I'll read out loud. But again, I do invite you, if you'd like to speak for yourself, you'd be more than welcome to do that. So Nan is saying to play the role of liaison, schedule a Zoom meeting with the two. Allah is saying, accept the rules of communication clear in the syllabus from the beginning. Right, so that transparency again. What are your options? How do you use these technologies to make these options available? Where can that happen? Kim is saying, ask Mohammed what method he's using to contact his classmate, then offer some ideas for getting a response from the classmate. Ask when did he reach out to his classmate. Maha uses Slack and creates a group for them to talk. Nice, so right, we're creating, to just bring us back, right, multiple doors, right? These can be low-tech solutions. It's just creating a chat group. It could be sending an email. It could be setting up a Zoom time, right? Thinking of just some simple ways to build connection. Zainab saying she would give him Zeke's contact and suggest he emails him, or maybe offer to write an introduction email. Dalal saying schedule a meeting between both of them and the instructor and discuss the problem. Right, so we're really kind of doing a lot of bridging here, right? Trying to bridge, do this outreach, create these spaces. And I appreciate especially, I want to return to Ola's point here about setting the rules clear in the syllabus from the beginning, that transparency again, right? Acknowledging the students, being really upfront about here are the challenges we're going to face, right? You're not going to be able to spontaneously run into each other. So how do you work together to construct those spaces that are meaningful? Nabil saying the problem still exists and change the group, right? And that would happen in a fully on-campus situation too sometimes, right? Sometimes, you know, the same kind of interpersonal constraints might be the same regardless. We just have to be more intentional about building these connections and using the technology to do that, as I can see here. I'm going to just pause for one more minute and see if there are other ideas that are emerging, because we do have another scenario here I want us to think about that I think may also reduce some, be part of thinking about a low stress experience. Because what we're doing here, right, anticipating, thinking through how we build these connections, this is also part of mitigating stress, both for you and for your students, right? The more you can think of ways to help them connect with each other, that's that social piece. You're also helping them think through how they support each other in this process. I'm just doing a quick look to see, I'm not seeing any hands up. And I'm seeing Aman say, but students have the same problems even when they're in class and have to work on projects together. Right, so this might be a stress point regardless. The technology might get blamed as the stressor is part of what I've seen come up in examples like this where, you know, again, Mohammed's sort of saying, well, if only I didn't have this technology barrier, then I could reach Zeke, right? I think part of what we need to do, what we might think about doing, is helping our students understand where the technology may in fact be a barrier, maybe a real barrier, or where, again, in some places, this is really just about being intentional in forming our connection with other people, or recognizing that, you know, maybe Zeke has a lot going on. Maybe Zeke isn't engaged. We don't really know in this case. We don't have enough information about what's happening with Zeke, really. But what we do know, and what, again, you all pointed out really helpfully here, is we have a lot of options that we can anticipate to help lower the stress for Mohammed, help lower the stress for you to set those expectations really early. All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to move this to a second scenario here. So we only have about 20 minutes left. But I want to kind of think about reducing stress from another angle, right? So here's our second scenario. Tasha has been attending the dual delivery classes remotely. However, whenever she zooms in, you're never really sure if she's present because she doesn't turn her camera on, and she rarely participates in the activities that you design. You're worried that Tasha is not really attending or engaging. What do you do? Maybe you've had this situation. It's a different angle, right? Where with Mohammed's situation, he was attending in person. Tasha, she's attending remotely. And so we're seeing the technology. There's some stress here, and maybe not seeing the same engagement that maybe you're used to seeing. What do you do? I'm seeing a couple of things come through the chat. I'm going to take another pause here and just remind you, if you'd like to raise a hand and speak aloud, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'll continue to amplify what I hear in the chat. So both Dalal and Hanan are saying, talk to her privately. Hoda is saying, ask her a question directly. Kim probably sent her a note to reach out to her. Patricia saying, implement activities in pairs, like breakout rooms. Maha saying, send her a private message to ask if she'd like to respond. Maha would email her. Ola saying, keep her engaged by asking questions and hearing her comments. Sama is pair her with Mohammed for a pair presentation. Okay, nice. So kind of trying to bridge, help Tasha really feel like she's part of the whole class community. Zainab asking me questions. Dalal asked for her reflection on what went on in class. Ooh, I like that idea a lot. How did that feel for you today? Maybe you ask everyone for their reflection on what went on in class privately and kind of see, take the temperature. So I'm seeing a lot of sort of one-on-one interpersonal outreach. This is fantastic, right? I'm really seeing that you're thinking of lots of ways to check in to make sure Tasha's doing okay. Because Tasha may have some stresses about attending remotely that you just can't see, just not able to access. That is a kind of stressor. And so again, having this kind of arsenal strategy, something simple, just a private message when you have students doing some work on their own quietly in class, thinking ahead about pairing students to help them feel included. This can all help kind of reduce some stress for everyone. Thank you. I'm seeing us kind of pause here. And again, since we've got about 20 minutes left, I want to make sure we have a little time for some open conversation too. And yes, I just want to acknowledge Ahmed's participation here too. Collective activity, like reading a passage. I think that's great. Don't put her on the spot, right? Maybe see, you could use a collaborative document, right? And see where Tasha might be coming into that collaborative document, or that digital pin board, right? Or maybe you can see her moving a virtual Post-it note around to see if she's there. I think that's a great idea too, especially if you're not really sure, right, what might be happening. And then Jalal says, make her responsible for delivering something. And that would be great for everyone, right? Again, perhaps you are thinking of activities where you can empower students, give them some agency to have some ownership over some portion of the class, regardless of where they are, to help them share. This also, again, is a sort of a low stress strategy because you're sharing, right, some of the co-teaching, just as you, to reduce your own stress, to build your own confidence with learning something new. You ask to work with a colleague or you ask to work with a peer. You do the same thing with your students, right? The same strategies apply. Awesome. These are really great ideas. What a thoughtful group. Gosh, I so appreciate everyone's contributions here. And I'm hearing the same themes throughout both Tasha's and Mohammed's situation, right? Which is really getting a little bit more information about what's going on with them and how the technology is or isn't getting in their way. Again, just as you would kind of survey how the technology is sometimes getting in your way or not. So I like doing some private surveys with students as well, kind of on top of these other strategies that you've suggested for reducing some of that. Again, stress comes from uncertainty, stress comes from surprises. So to reduce some of the surprises, I'll often ask students questions like, how would you rank your prior experiences learning in an online or hybrid or dual delivery modality, right? Kind of getting a feel for what they think these experiences are like for them can really mitigate some of those surprises. I also often like to ask, what's something that you'd like for me to know about your prior learning experiences? What's something that you think would be important for me to recognize? Interesting things can come out of that, right? And we can reduce some of those, again, surprises around the attitudes students might be bringing. And what's something you'd like for me to know about your access to technologies for your learning? Similarly, you could share with your students what's something you'd like for them to know about your access to technologies for your learning. It goes both ways. But the point is just to ask, right? To, again, be transparent about what some of these choices are. And if you don't have time to survey, I do like some of these questions too from Katie Linder's Blended Course Design Workbook, where she kind of invites us to think about, what can I assume my students know about the technology tools and platforms used in my course? What can I assume my students know about time management? What can I assume my students know about communicating in online environments? And what can I assume my students know about how to use face-to-face class time? So some of these questions, you want to be careful because it's easy to make assumptions. I mean, she's asking to make an assumption in some ways, but I would sort of try to pair these approaches, right? Try to ask and anticipate. It's iterative. The more you can do a little bit of both, again, the more you can reduce those surprises, reduce that stress, reduce that concern. And Kim listens to Katie's podcast. Awesome. Yeah, Katie Linder does a ton of tremendous work. And I agree, Maha. You usually can do a quick live poll, maybe just asking a question about, what do you know about time management? What do you know about communicating this environment? Just checking in. What do you know? And even do this with your peers as instructors. What do you know about this? Again, it really just helps to have that sense of what to expect. And because Matt's saying a diagnostic survey can help. I love that idea, right? Just getting a feel, a diagnosis of what's occurring. And this can also contribute to what Flower Darby refers to as roundabout design in your course, right? So you may have heard of backwards design, which is sort of this philosophy that you start with your outcomes and you design your activities to support your outcomes. But what I think actually reduces a lot more stress. We can get stressed out when we get really rigidly attached to like, okay, the technology must work this way. One outcome must align with this one activity, and that must lead to these one set of goals for my students. But what Flower Darby suggests that I think is really useful is saying, okay, as you're designing a dual delivery course or an online course, I think this applies to all modalities, right? See what information you're getting along the way. You might be taking some traffic roundabouts. I don't know if this is referred to as a roundabout actually in Egypt. So just realize that this traffic circle is called different things in different places. But in the US, it's called a roundabout where your car can sometimes take certain exits and get back on the road. But the point is the information you're getting from you, from your students, from your experience, that perhaps can change the outcomes, the kind of dialogues you can have. And thank you, Ibrahim. Oh, he just left, but I hope he hears my appreciation for him coming, even though he had to leave. So, okay, we're almost at the end here. And I hope what we've sort of seen is that we can simplify our tech, make those affordances and constraints visible, and anticipate what's possible with them to reduce those barriers to access and to kind of see what our options are to have those backup plans. So how do we make an impact through all this? What does it mean to reduce our stress, reduce our tech, and still create a really memorable experience? So here is our last kind of formal chat break. Oop, I skipped too far ahead. Excuse me. All right, here we go. I am curious about what you consider a high impact practice in your teaching. And this could be in dual delivery, this could be in any modality, but I'm wondering, how do you know when you're making a really big impact on your students? And yes, I appreciate, I'm seeing Amon's question about spending more time, making sure things are working, that waste time that isn't wasted in in-person class. Yeah, it is a really good point. Let's return to this. I think we will have a little time to return to that at the end, if that's okay. So I think it's a little tangential from where we are right now. But
that's what I wrote. I told her we'll ask it at the end. I know what you're thinking.
Thank you, Maha. Yes. We're on the same page. Very good. So I'm making a note that we'll return to that. But for now, I'm curious about high impact. What's something that you consider really impactful? Okay. And again, I'm calling this a chat break here, but if you want to raise a hand and speak up on the mic too, that's still an option. So Kim is saying reflection. Zainab is saying they take responsibility and they're engaged. Maha's also saying reflection. There's aha moments. Amon's saying that students communicate and engage. Kesmat saying something that says time and energy, make teaching clear, autonomous, seeing a lot of themes around agency and reflection here. Ola brings in fun. I love that. Fun can have a huge impact. Play, emotion, positive emotion. Sarah Rose Kavanaugh speaks to this a lot, the ways in which emotion and learning, cognition intertwine. If we're happier, we're going to learn more. Maha's saying when they see relevance, connections to real life. Azal, when students come forward with new questions. Dalal, when I find something engaging, coming up with new ideas, relating past to present. Ahmed, engagement, excitedly intellectual feedback. Hoda, making good, meaningful, deep connections and synthesis. Hoda, when they're applying learning to new contexts. Yes. So I'm going to actually escape full screen for just a moment because I want to capture in writing a couple of these themes. So I have actually a placeholder slide here, our high impact practices and our themes. So I want to write these down because I think it's important for us to remember these as we plan for and think about some small ways to really amplify these high impact practices, even with some of the barriers of technology. So I saw agency, autonomy, really emerging here. Personal meaning and connection, another big theme that I'm seeing come out. Is Hanan's when I find students explain the content of the lesson to a peer who's missed class. Nice, I'm saying it's kind of like sort of community building, right? Building connections and with their peers. Aliyah saying when they use their learning to positively impact others and enhance their own lives, how they see things. Nice, so I wanna synthesize that because I'm seeing that come up in a few different ways as well, like bridging to contexts outside of class, right? Going beyond the assignments or activities in class. Nice. Any other ideas here that we want to share, other high impact practices? Oh, I see a lot about new questions, right? So it's something maybe kind of a subset here, like building independent ideas. Authenticity, nice. I think that ties into bridging those contexts outside of class, right? Authentic assignments are usually much higher impact, much more meaningful. Creating new ideas, original thoughts. Yes, I think that's part of this agency piece still, right? Original and creative ideas. Excellent. So the reason I'm wanting us to think about this, these high impact practices, I'm seeing a lot here about the social components. Let me make this full screen again so we can see a little bit more easily. Curiosity, right, Nabil? That's huge. I think that's another piece of kind of building personal meaning for students. But what I think ties all these things together is students recognizing their role in the class. Students seeing how they are active members of the class community who can take the ideas from the class to wherever they want to go next, whether that's to one of their peers or that's back to you, or that's to their friends or to their family. They're finding enough meaning to be independent and creative. Right, Huda is saying student-led, and Kim is saying when they see and know the impact of their classwork outside the classroom. Right, fantastic. And there's ways that I think we can set that up right from the beginning. And I think we've already alluded to this in some ways around the technology. So we're sort of tying them together, but I wanted to share another graphic organizer that might help to kind of elevate students' personal understandings of their roles, their agency, their autonomy, their curiosity. And so I like doing this activity sort of on the first or second day, really, but you could even bring this in later, right? Sometimes it's nice to do a refresher on this. I call this your role, my role, our roles, right? So when you're on campus, when you're online, or when you're unable to attend asynchronous class, or when you're working in peer review groups, what's your role as a student? What's my role? as an instructor, and what are our shared roles, right? What are the things, where do we come together? How do we develop ideas independently? How do I help you, right? The more that we can just be really, really clear, really obvious about what you do as a student, what I do as an instructor, what we do in community together, the easier it can be to set the groundwork for those agential and those autonomous experiences. Yes, more frameworks. I know that was Tamaha, but there's a lot of different sort of organizers that we can use, right? Again, this is lowering our stress. The more we can start to lay this out, the fewer surprises we have. I think setting shared goals is also a really important part of making sure that we give students that autonomy so that they can find that personal meaning, right? We'll be more curious, be able to spark that curiosity more if we establish very transparently what we're all trying to do. So these is actually just a copy of instructions that I use, again, in an activity for classes I teach, where I just ask students, what should we all strive to do to engage in inclusive and critical discussion in this class from here on out? Gosh, I didn't mention this in my introduction. I teach writing. So I also am in rhetoric and composition for those of you who are in that space. So hooray, we're in shared community there. But I do support instructors across the curriculum. But I should just say that this comes from a writing class that I teach. So I usually ask students, right, just what are some of the best strategies you've used or you've seen others use to generate thoughtful discussions? What are some ways that you'd ideally appreciate seeing your peers behave in class? What are some things that we can do to ensure that everyone feels that they have a voice and can equally participate in the conversations in large groups, in small groups, in pairs? So just, again, asking, checking in. This will really help us get on the same page, right? Where do you find personal meaning? Where do you find creativity? This comes in the form of requesting feedback too, right? So Maha kind of alluded to this actually by saying, hey, we should always have time to survey, just do some polls. This is another way to create that high impact, right? If we could just check in throughout, take the temperature, hence the little image of the thermometer. We can see, are we having fun? Is this evoking curiosity for you? Are you finding connection with this material? I even just like something as simple as just show a thumbs up at certain points in activity. Something I also like to do is if I'm feeling the energy kind of lag in a dual delivery space, I'll often ask folks, and someone actually mentioned in low tech, I think of a thumbs up, raising hands is low tech. Our little thumbs up emojis are kind of like raising our hands, right? Hey, which option would we like to take for the rest of class? Option A or option B? If I show a thumbs, who wants option A? If I show a thumbs, who wants option B? Really simple, really great way just to check in and give choices at key moments if we have capacity to do that. Reflection is something that a lot of you brought up, right? And so I agree that this is a high impact practice, encouraging low stakes, ungraded check-in reflection. Actually, many of you in the case studies too, when we talked about Tasha and asked Tasha, I think it was Dalal who said, hey, maybe have Tasha reflect on how the class went for her. Awesome. I think asking everyone to reflect on, right? How did the assignment make you feel? What were some barriers or limitations to your ability to complete this assignment? I have written online here, but you could say in dual delivery or on campus, what were some advantages or benefits to completing this assignment online, in dual delivery, on campus? So disclaimer here that all these reflection prompts, you don't need to ask all these all at once, and you probably can't. It's a lot of questions to ask, but I'm just giving lots of different examples here to give you lots of different ways of thinking about how you kind of can collect these ideas. But what are some things you are proud of? What are some things you're going to feel not feeling certain of? What's a part of your learning process that you'd like to improve? These are all different ideas and ways that we can check in, bridge that personal understanding, bridge that personal meaning and autonomy. So speaking of reflections, I want to invite your reflections this juncture and hear what else is on your mind today. We're almost at the end here. We just have a couple minutes left. And so one place I think we could start, of course, is the question that Iman asked, right? About, feeling like we're spending more time making sure that things are working or that students are there or no one's left out. And that can waste time that was not wasted in an in-person class. Let's pick up there. And I want to hear other thoughts on this too. So certainly if others have thoughts to Iman's kind of problem or question, you could voice it in the chat, you can raise a hand. But I'm happy to kind of take a first shot at it. which is what I would say here is that I think when it comes to kind of being cognizant of the time, one thing we can do is sort of set some of the stage before class begins, right? So something I usually like to do before a term is send a little like either video or a set of instructions that kind of sets up these expectations prior to class even beginning. Not everyone will watch it, not everyone will read it, but it's something, right? It's better than nothing to kind of just say, hey, here's what to expect from the first day. Here are some things to make sure that you're getting what you need to be successful here. And once you kind of make those materials once, you can reuse them term after term, right? A lot of that stuff is kind of evergreen. So doing a little bit of asynchronous outside of class time kind of expectation building can help a little bit. That practice piece right on your end can help. I even like doing a graded assignment sometimes where I ask students to practice using or submitting the technology in some way too. It can kind of incentivize a little practice on their end as well, because again, the strategies that help you build confidence are the ones that will help them build confidence as well. And bringing it all together can be really challenging. I agree, Kismat. So acknowledging that challenge, right? Even in person sometimes, I remember when I was teaching a fully on-campus class prior to the pandemic, there was one class session where I wasted tons of time just trying to like get people into groups for this activity. I way over designed it, and it was kind of a disaster. But the point is, I think as if we just over engineer, that's kind of when things go wrong. So preparing, anticipating, keeping it simple can all really help. And yes, I agree with this approach, Maha, too, of kind of asking tech savvy ones to pair with less tech savvy ones and seeing who knows what from those surveys early on. That's brilliant. Great way to save some time as well. We have a minute left. So before we formally end, I know you have that activity. I do just want to thank you for your active participation, your amazing ideas. This is a really compassionate group. I can see that. I can just feel the caring that you have through your responses, through our working through these case studies, through these ideas. So I thank you for your engagement, and I thank you for making this time today. I know that you're staying after for further conversation. But I just want to check in real quickly and see if there are other questions, comments, ideas that we wanted to share before we wrap, before I take my leave and you reflect without me here.
And we're only doing that because we don't want to impose on your time. Obviously, we'd love to have you forever. We'd love to have you here. You're getting a lot of thank yous. But if anyone else wants to share anything else, either a question or a key takeaway, I just want to say, Janae, you've modeled such good presenting and good teaching. I got so many ideas from some of the things you're doing that I think I'm going to suggest to people in workshops and do in my own keynotes and workshops. So.
Wow, that's like such high praise coming from you, who, if you haven't seen Maha give a keynote talk, y'all, you got to go see Maha give a talk too. She gives like by far some of the best keynotes I've ever seen. So really just masterful at engaging others as well. Well, thanks to all of you again, truly. I hope with this, again, I always like to say that there's a lot of ideas you can work with, and you probably can't take all of them all at once in terms of reducing stress, just to bring us back to that point again. So I always like to say, take what's useful, leave the rest. If there was just one thing, one takeaway you got from today, woo, that's like the most amazing thing ever. So really appreciate your time, attention. I hope you'll stay in touch. You can find me in many different ways. I hope you have a great rest of your symposium. And a great rest of the week. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing here and bid you all a good evening over there. The day has just started for me here.
Thank you so much, Janae. This was a nourishing session, as I was expecting. Thank you so much for everything.
Good. Thank you.
And you'll see on Twitter which things I like the most.
Oh, good. Excellent. I'll look forward to seeing those reflections and online or anywhere else. So,
and we'll be writing a summary also of all the sessions. We'll send that to you when it's done as well.
Beautiful. All right, I'll look forward to that. Great. All right, well, take care, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Hope to see you all again somewhere in the world. So, alrighty. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Okay. So if anybody needs to leave or anybody needs to take like a 5-minute break, of course, you can do that. We're staying until 8, inshallah. 8 Yehuda, right? That's how long we're staying. So in case people would like to share their key takeaways. I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes so that if people are leaving, we'll know that they're leaving. And
I
maybe
just put
needs a
the
quick
link
break to the rest of the symposium.
the rest of the symposium.
Mhm.
I just put the link to the rest of the symposium in the chat, just in case you need to leave and would like to do the session.
Kim, it's so good to see you here. I know I owe you a phone call, so I'll call you sometime soon, inshallah.
Okay, bye.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Okay. Yeah, I'm so looking forward to tomorrow's keynote as well, inshallah, 3:15. All right, would anybody like to share any thoughts, ideas, more things, ideas you got from her that you'd like CLT to take further into workshops or anything else? ابتدينا مع صلاة المغرب خلصنا مع صلاة العشاء. You have to remember not to schedule things between Maghrib and Aisha. I had an idea for workshops from the part about communicating expectations, even though we talked about this a lot during the pandemic, about how to communicate expectations with students. I like this idea of the table and of like setting the goals with the students. I think we could maybe give a workshop just on that, because I think a lot of things that go badly in courses is maybe because we haven't communicated expectations really well. Ismet, affective filter. Everyone I know who is a language teacher uses this term a lot. Do you want to explain it to people? Is everyone here a language teacher? No, not everyone's a language teacher. So do you explain
It's just a fancy word for, you know, like the students feeling stressed and, you know, this kind of stuffiness that's in the classroom, making the students more comfortable.
Yeah.
Maha, can I say something that I've been thinking about for a long time?
Of course.
Before COVID, I remember having this, because I was teaching freshmen for such a long time, the value of making everything explicit. And then with online and having to put everything online, the value of making everything explicit. Like, so when she showed Dom Norman's this idea of user experience and how good design is invisible versus visible, and this kind of this paradox of it shouldn't be invisible, it should be visible, like this kind of debate. It should be visible, right? It should be explicit. And if it's not, and students have to guess, students shouldn't have to guess, right? They shouldn't have to guess what you want out of an assignment. They shouldn't have to guess what's coming next in the course. It's not a guessing game. And I think with online, and especially with the last 2 or 3 years, I learned a lot about instructional design and intentional design and making everything so crystal clear. This was a really good experience for me, even just, and having working in a CLT. So I guess that was something that I think she made a really good example of with that picture of just that door and the push. It made it so clear to me. I love that picture.
I'll add something to what Hoda was saying, is that it's even after writing clear objectives and creating an assignment that makes complete sense to you, we sometimes misjudge what makes sense to the students. And I had to learn the hard way that I needed very, very explicit details when it comes to creating assignment prompts, when it comes to articulating my class objectives, my course objectives, very small words, short sentences, bit by bit, kind of like 1 + 2 = 3. This kind of, yeah, it makes sense that the students will come out of my class with the 3. It doesn't connect in their heads. So and I think some instructors do need help with that, because I needed lots of help with that. Just this kind of articulation that didn't come naturally to me.
I've also found something very strange, which
Maybe
is that
Dalal,
some
we have Dalal,
semesters.
Hiba.
Ah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, Maha, we have just a few non-CLT people, so maybe we can make a
Yes.
round of the people who
Yeah.
are non-CLT, see if they have any
Yeah,
comments or
that'd be
questions.
great. So Dalal, Ahmed, Abdul Majid, Hiba, Ahmed Said, and Raghda just came in, but she missed the keynote, I think. I'm not sure. Ahmed wrote something in the chat. The synthesis of low tech and low stress. Okay,
I
yes,
don't
because you're a
I don't
philosopher.
understand. I'm sorry, I don't
philosopher.
understand.
I think there is a completion to this, to the thought. It's not complete yet. Is it?
Yeah, I don't think the thought is complete. That's I don't know if everybody knows Heidegger either. Existential Heideggerian and me think that high-tech methods. What about high-tech methods? Ahmed, is your audio working? I remember there was someone whose audio wasn't working earlier.
I think we can just ask you to unmute if you can.
Are more often than not stressful and distracting. The high-tech methods can be stressful and they're usually stressful and distracting. I think. Good follow up on this. Cannot unmute right now, he's saying. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Sometimes too much technology can be stressful and distracting. I think more technology than you need. Dalal, what about you? What are you thinking?
About the technology I need?
No, about the session. Anything, any key takeaways from the
yeah.
session? Yeah.
I think the point that I liked was the design, making everything very clear at the beginning, the student's role, my role, our role. And I think I need to have more a session about that, maybe from CLT, and get to practice it more and know about it more. What should I do? Things like that. Something that's happening by nowadays is that I'm teaching face-to-face, but every day one or two students are not feeling well, and so I open Zoom and I have them there in class, and I teach the class and they're there also. I'm teaching them.
How many do you have overall?
No, there are 8 students, but in this special class and this specific class, but we have one has had COVID, one has had one was not feeling well, and so I found that almost every day I am opening Zoom and I'm teaching the class, and then I'm also teaching Zoom. So I feel that it's something. It's not like dual delivery, but yani something in between.
Yeah. But because you have a small number, it's possible that the audio works out okay because you sit around the table maybe with that. But if someone has a larger class and they try to do that, the students are not going to hear very well.
I don't sit around on the table. Yani I'm always
walking around.
Yes.
So how do you make that work?
But because they hear what I say.
They still hear okay?
Yeah. And they see what I write. I make sure that the camera is on the blackboard and they see what I write also. And they tell me that they benefited from that.
Okay.
Because I teach them about 3 hours a day, and so
that's a lot to miss if you have to miss like 4 sessions or 8 sessions or whatever. Yeah. And Hiba wrote in the chat, I think she left. What is the table for expectations? And Ahmed saying how Heidegger was very critical of technology. Aren't all philosophers very critical of a lot of things? There's different focus areas, I guess. Raghda, I'm not sure if you came in after she had gone. Well, you came when she was there and then you dropped out and came back. I don't know if she can hear me. What about Ahmed Said? How was the session for you?
I think Dr. Rauda unmuted, then muted again, so I'm not sure if she's
Okay, so I'm going to stop recording. If folks still want to chat a little bit, we can do that. Chris, I think we can stop recording for now. Okay.